Please be seated. One of the great joys of my ministry while in New Hampshire was that I had the opportunity to work with a group of brilliant educators, and together we founded an Episcopal school, a standalone middle school for grades 6 through 8 called Heronfield Academy. It was such an honor to be in the company of these educators. I'm mindful of Heronfield. I'm mindful of this group because one of the founders, by the name of Rich Davis, recently passed away. He was a saint of a man. So one day I was at the school offering a chapel service. I would go a couple times a month, and the theme of that service was how to make a difference in your community. And so in the midst of it, I reminded them of the quote that is most often attributed to Gandhi, which is, "Be the change you want to see in the world." Do you know that quote? Right. You know what? Well, he didn't say it. So I'm feeling pretty good about the service. It's gone well. I'm standing after the service. I'm talking to a teacher, and this girl comes up. I think she's in 7th grade, and she says, Gandhi wasn't the one who really said that. Nothing like the unfiltered words of a 7th grader, right? And so I was kind of a little bit back on my heels because I'm not used to being fact-checked by a 13-year-old. Although my daughters fact-checked me plenty. But anyhow, so I said, well, you know what? Let me find out about that. Let me find out who actually said this, and I'll get back to you. So she walked away. Well, the day wore on and the week wore on, and honestly, I forgot. So the end of the week, the teacher sends me this great article that was titled something like famous quotes that are misattributed to someone else, something like that. And sure enough, Gandhi never said that. There is no actual recording of Gandhi ever saying, "Be the change you want to see in the world." Not that it's not a great sentiment. Also, did you know that there is no recording of Marie Antoinette saying, "Let them eat cake"? Not that that's great advice, too. Machiavelli never actually said the ends justify the means. Who knew? And then I think the last one in the article, the last quote in the article was one that actually I've used any number of times. Maybe you're familiar with it. Let me give you a little test here. So the definition of insanity is? Okay, that did sound like the murmuring of... So, and I'm sure that people at home heard exactly what you said. The definition, but you're right, the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. Most frequently attributed to Albert Einstein, who never said it. The article suggested maybe it was actually Rita Mae Brown. Maybe it emerged from the 12-step movement. I have my own theory. I think the first person to say it was Simon when Jesus said, "Put the nets in the water again." Could be, right? Who knows? Who knows? Thank you. Okay, so let's get to the gospel story here. If you remember the gospel from 2 weeks ago, and I admit that that's maybe wishful thinking on my part, but if you remember from 2 weeks ago, Jesus has had his homecoming. He's offended people in his hometown synagogue. They've thought about literally taking him and throwing him off a cliff, and so he's gotten out of town, and he's been wandering the hillside, teaching in the region of Lake Gennesaret. Say that 3 times fast. It's around the Sea of Galilee in northeastern Israel. And the crowds are getting bigger and bigger. So big, in fact, that on this particular day, Jesus goes to teach, and he can't speak to them by staying on the banks. And so he sees these fishermen who are cleaning their nets. And he says, "Hey, will you take me out?" Well, actually, in this translation, he just gets in the boat. Can you imagine Peter being like, "What are you doing?" But he gets in the boat, and he says to Simon, whom we come to know later as Peter, "Will you take me out?" Now, you need to understand something here. Simon and his mates, James and John, they were out fishing all night. And we're not talking about some cruise boat with a cold thermos of beer here. They're out fishing, hoping to drag in enough to make a daily wage. And they have caught nothing. So now it's daytime. They've scrubbed and cleaned their boats. They've scrubbed and cleaned their nets that probably been filled with silt and with dirt. And they got to be tired. They got to be ready to go home, ready to get some sleep, right? Jesus is like, "Hey, will you take me out?" Could you blame Simon if he was like, "No, sorry, find another boat"? Could you blame Simon if he said, "I'm going home"? We don't know what he says. Jesus is in the boat, and out they go. And Jesus starts teaching. And apparently, Simon is listening, because when Jesus finishes, Simon addresses him as rabbi, an address of respect. Simon's been listening. Oh, this guy's pretty good. But Jesus isn't done, because then Jesus looks at Simon and says, "Well, let's go out deeper, and let's throw our nets into the water." And this time, Simon chafes a little bit. This time, Simon resists a little bit. He says, "Oh, we've been out there. We were fishing. We caught nothing." And I imagine he wanted to say something to Jesus like, "Hey, you leave the fishing to me and you do the teaching." Or maybe he wanted to say to Jesus, "Jesus, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over." He maybe, right? But he says, "Okay." And they go back out to the deep waters. They throw the net over the boat. Picture Simon's eyes rolling. And this time, kazowie. That's Hebrew for holy cow. It's not. But anyhow, they fill the net up so much that the net's tearing, so much that they can't drag all the fish into the banks, and Simon has to call to his mates, and now they get the nets in, and the boat starts to sink. I mean, do you get the picture here? This is something extraordinary. And when they get to the banks, Simon realizes this was no ordinary fishing haul. This is no ordinary human. This is no run-of-the-mill rabbi. He falls to his knees in awe and trembling. Who can blame him? And Jesus looks at Simon and realizes, oh, this is a good man. He doesn't see Simon as a sinner. He doesn't see Simon as merely a fisherman. He sees him as a creation of God. This is a good, a capable person. I'm going to have you do God's work, God's things. And Simon, we hear, drops everything and follows Jesus. That's the story, and I love this story. I love the Jesus we meet because Jesus comes to Simon in the most ordinary of places, where he works. And Jesus sees Simon for what he always does, but knows that that can be put to good use for what God wants and imagines. And Jesus understands why Simon might be trembling, but he says, don't be afraid. And Jesus invites him to get up and go with him for the ride of his life. I love the Jesus we see here. And frankly, if you think about it, I love Simon's response too. He's willing to take Jesus out. All right. I also appreciate it. I feel a little bit better that he pushes back a little bit because, sometimes so do I. Maybe you do too. I appreciate that he's tired. He's cranky. And yet he's willing to give it a try. And I certainly appreciate it that he's willing to drop everything to follow Jesus. This is called Simon's call story. And this is Simon's calling. He will eventually be Peter. But you know what? I think that this story can be our call story as well. And let's be clear, just if you wear a black shirt and a plastic collar, we're not the only ones called. Each and every one of us is called. Each and every one of us can be put to God's purpose. I want you to imagine this. I want you to imagine that the same Jesus, the same Spirit, the same spark of the Holy meets you in the most ordinary of places where you might be, in your place of work, in your home, in your coffee shop, sees you for whatever gifts you might have, for whatever abilities you might have, and calls you to use those gifts for God's purposes in ways that sometimes are simple, sometimes are grand, but always are sacred. Each and every one of you sitting here today. And just to be clear, it's not just a one-shot deal, but it's time and time again. Psst. Come with me. And we've got decisions to make whenever that happens. Are we going to be that first response of Simon, I'm tired, it's no good, I can't do it, I want to go home? Or are we going to be willing to get in the boat with this Jesus and see what can happen? Because on our own, those nets might come up empty. But in the company of the holy, knowing that we are not doing it on our own, those nets come up with an abundance beyond our wildest imaginings. We are sitting in this time where we're seeking a sense of agency. What can we do with the fires? What can we do with the politics? What can we do with this or that? And I want to suggest, keep your eyes and ears open to how Jesus is coming into your life in certain moments and saying, you can do this. I can make you fish for people. I can make you an agent of grace. I can make you a sign of love. I can make you a source of hope. Psst, get in the boat and go with me. It may be daunting to imagine. You might think, that's silly, I don't believe in this calling stuff. You may even think that it's kind of crazy. But here's the thing. I think that the definition of insanity isn't simply doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different results. I think in some ways the definition of insanity is saying no to Jesus over and over and over again and expecting everything to stay the same. Amen.